it is lovely and fantastic to see so many of you here today. I think it's an absolutely sold-out event. And we are so delighted at the Biographers Club and Hatchwords to welcome Carla Kaplan, who's only over here for 1 week, to talk about her truly brilliant new biography of Jessica Mitford, Decca to everyone who knew her, with an old friend of Decca's and fellow troublemaker, named Helena Kennedy.
It's fine. I wear that with pride.
Carla Kaplan is Davis Distinguished Professor of American Literature at Northeastern University and author of a biography of Zora Neale Hurston and a book called Miss Anne in Harlem. Both of them were chosen by the New York Times as remarkable books. And Troublemaker, this book here, is already a finalist for both the National Book Critics Circle Award and PEN America Biography Prize. And it's been awarded the Goldsmith Prize for the Shorenstein Center for Media and Public Policy. So that's just already, there may be more coming through. Baroness Kennedy is, as I know you know, a barrister, broadcaster, Labour member of the House of Lords, President of Justice, Director of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, and so much more. In Carla Kaplan, I reckon that Decca Mitford seems to have found her ideal biographer, and in Helena Kennedy, Carla seems to have found her ideal interlocutor. So I'm going to hand over to that.
Great. Thank you. That was really a joyous introduction. Let me tell you immediately, I hardly know this woman, but I feel that I know her now really, really well. It really is a nice feeling, Carla, because you came to interview me. I have a house with my husband in Cape Cod in Wellfleet, and it came about through my connections with basically sort of civil liberties lawyers in the United States, including Bob Truhaft, who was married to Jessica Mitford, and we ended up holidaying on the Cape, and ended up buying a house in Wellfleet. And Trump is doing his best to keep me from it and to keep me out of the United States. But
I'm moving in with you.
So what happened was that Carla came to see me and sat on the deck, and we chewed the fat about this wonderful woman who used to come and join us on the. She came to the Cape on holiday with Bob, and we had the most riotous times. Anyway, but we'll talk about that in the course of these discussions. But Carla how long has it taken you to write this book?
10 years.
Just 10 years. And so when I heard that this book was in the offing, and then it was still in the offing,
and then
still in the offing, and I got rather anxious about it, because I thought, oh, it's going to have a million footnotes, and it's going to become really an in-depth, very deep and meaningful piece of work. And so I was slightly anxious, I have to tell you. I should have known better, because we did laugh a lot when we were together, and so I should have known better. But can I tell you, when it arrived and I started nibbling at it at night and whenever I had time, it is really a wonderful, wonderful book. It is funny, it captures the Decca in the most delicious way, and it tells the story. It tells the story of America at a particular time, but of this extraordinary character in the midst of stuff where she somehow still sailed through being her extraordinary self. I mean, it really is true. And I met her, and some of the introducers, or the people who were around when I met Decca, I met her in the late 70s. I was very friendly. One of my closest girlfriends was Sally Belfridge, and Sally knew Jessica Mitford very well, because her parents, they'd all been involved in the whole business of the House of Un-American Activities. They were all people of the left and so on. And Sally came to live here in London with her husband, and then had two children. And I met her again. I met her through a man called Leonard Boudin and his wife Jean. And they introduced me to Sally, and Sally became a stalwart in my life. She became one of the most important people in my life. And we were very, very close friends. And the sadness to me is that she's no longer with us. But she introduced me to Decca. Decca came to London on one of her whirlwind tours. She was coming in to, and so Sally said, well, you must meet Helena. She's also a civil liberties lawyer. And I met, of course, Bob Truhaft. And we fell in love. I fell in love with, nobody couldn't love Decca. And because she just, I mean, amazed me and was just, and I've never laughed so much in my life as in her company. And she then introduced me to a million other extraordinary people, Maya Angelou, and then when I went to the United States on vacations and things, to extraordinary people, and people who appear in this book, the Durs, Virginia Durr, and others. But let's tell the story in a way. It's hard to do that with 50 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever we've got. But the book really does tell this extraordinary life. And it was an extraordinary life.
It was.
And I'll start by telling us how it all began, the kind of family that she came from, the madness of it all.
And I'll try to do that briefly enough that we still have time to do other things as well.
We've got to keep the American bit.
Yes.
Whereas we could spend our life talking about the madness of
right.
our sisters and the madness of our parents.
And this is a book really mostly about the American bit. But first, let me just say, I want to thank the bookstore. I want to thank Erin Banks for co-sponsoring. I want to thank Helena for being my interlocutor. How many of you in this room knew Jessica Mitford? Ben, hello. Her son is here. Or Bob Truhaft. So quite a few. There's something both wonderful and very intimidating about being the biographer of someone who was so larger than life, so beloved, and in the presence of some of you who knew and loved her, and of course were raised by her. But I'm going to just try to skate over all of that and do my best. So it is very important for those of you who didn't know her or don't know the earlier story to have some little bit of a sense of where she came from, to understand what she chose to leave behind in the choices she made, and what she carried away from a background she put behind her. Because part of what makes Jessica Mitford so extraordinary, in my view, is that not only did she leave behind a life that many people covet and think they want, wealth and privilege and status, but she was incredibly canny about taking away from that rejected life exactly what she needed and exactly what she could use. So that we have a story of remarkable self-transformation and reshaping, but also a story of someone who knew how to carry away with her the pieces of an eschewed past that she could most make use of. And so I hope some of those will come up later. She grew up, as some of you I think very well know, in the Cotswolds, one of 6 sisters. She was raised in a household that was British aristocracy, some wealth. They were more land rich than they were cash rich, as we would say in the States. There was cash, but there was a great deal of land. And there was an enormous just weight of tradition. Her parents were very traditional in many ways, but also extremely eccentric. Baron Redesdale was known for the eccentricities of his dress, of his behavior. He would actually set the hounds to chasing all 7 of his children, which alarmed the villagers no end, but the kids thought was great fun. He kept a pet mongoose. He railed against everything that was outside the house. He pronounced the world outside the house elsewhere with a capital E, and he pronounced himself against it as if it were a political position.
Iran.
He was elsewhere, as if, yes, exactly. He was member of parliament, and his official title in parliament, and Helena knows I'm not making this up, he was Chancellor of the Drains. That was actually his official title in parliament, which meant he was in charge of keeping women out of the parliamentary bathroom.
And let me tell you, once we got in, we've ruined it.
You ruined it.
Everything
ruined it.
Oh, of course.
Well, Helena particularly just destroyed it. He lived in horror that women would use the bathrooms in Parliament. He lived in horror of change. If anything, his wife was even more eccentric. She had grown up as a very young girl without a mother, lived on board a ship, ran her father's household from the age of 14, was actually a brilliant financial manager who was never allowed to be in charge of the family finances. Such a shame. She would have done an extraordinary job. And both parents believed that young women should not be educated. The girls the Mitford girls, as they were always called, and as they are still called, were famous for being famous and for being beautiful, and they were being raised to marry well and perpetuate their class. They were not raised for careers, but all of them were brilliant, and all of them were driven. And so what did they do? They reached into thin air and pulled down imaginary futures. And one of the reasons they have become so famous is every one of them realized those futures. Some of those imaginary futures were, as I would put it, extremely unworthy of their talents and their imagination and their skills. Nancy became a famous novelist. Pamela was known as a country woman, the only one to keep out of the public eye, perhaps having something to do with the fact that she left a very traditional marriage for an Italian woman. More on that later, maybe. Diana left her extremely traditional marriage to Brian Guinness, heir to the Guinness fortune, for Oswald Mosley, the president of the British Union of Fascists, the fascist. She was a lifelong fascist, completely unrepentant, went to her death blaming the Holocaust on the Jews. Unity Valkyrie Mitford, conceived in swastika Canada. You cannot make this stuff up. You don't even need to make this stuff up because it's all there. Declared when she pulled down her imaginary future, she declared that she would be a Nazi, to which Jessica, always known as Decca, said, well, then I will be a communist. And she wrote away for literature and started studying. Deborah said she would be a duchess. She almost blew it. She almost got it wrong. She married the second son, but the first son was killed in an accident, and she became Duchess of Devonshire. So this group of amazing young women left an imprint on Decca that is indelible and remarkable because its indelibility was taken into avenues you would never imagine, including the American Communist Party, where she went into the American Communist Party in California filled with the sort of antics and love of wordplay and love of jokes and love of storytelling she had imbibed from her sisters. Alone amongst this group, Jessica Mitford had a fierce sense of justice and of right and wrong. Now, all of you have known children, some of you have been children, who look around you and say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Why do we have so much and everybody else has nothing? This doesn't make any sense. And all of you have known or been children who maybe outgrew that a little bit. Well, not Decca. She never outgrew it. And alone amongst her family, she had a fierce sense that something was deeply wrong with the British class system, that kind of inequity made absolutely no sense, and so she ran away. But what she ran away from was social inequity and economic unfairness. What she carried away with her was the sort of tribal love of play of all of her sisters. Denied any outside education, they were thrown completely back on one another, and they became one another's education. They taught each other how to laugh and how to play and how to fight and how to argue and who to love and who to hate and what to read, and they had a massive library at their disposal, and they left on one another a profound imprint.
That's true.
But Decca walked away from all of that into a life that was completely as different from the Cotswolds as a life can be. She ended up making her life as a communist and eventually a writer in Oakland, California. How's that for a summary?
Well, I mean Carla, why the book for me was so fabulous was because I've been kind of up close to this in a way, and I never sort of analysed her personality in the way that you do in the book. About that business, about the things that she kept and as she was discarding. I was all too conscious of her as a discarder of all of that stuff. And she was always sort of intrigued by the fact that I was the girl of the working classes, that I was brought up in the tenements of Glasgow, and that all fascinated her, and how I'd ended up in this sort of upper middle class profession. But I didn't ever sort of dig into the things that you have perceptively taken out of all the stuff that you went through, taking out, and from the letters particularly. Tell about the letters. I mean, these were people who wrote letters to each other at great length, and the letters gave you a sort of great resource. Actually, we should set you to work on the Epstein file.
Oh my God, no! God, no!
These communications.
Please don't.
I'm always joking.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Don't do it.
Do that to any good soul. Anyway, but she really did. She wrote and she wrote remarkably, and what I think that you show also is that she took with her some of the negative stuff of Englishness, in that she when she suffered pain, when she lost her child, her first baby dying, that the tragedy, because we tell the story about her running away. She ran away with basically Winston Churchill's whatever, and he was related. I mean, he was a posh boy who'd been at, was it Eton or somewhere? Which school was he at? He was at one of those schools.
Yeah, he wasn't at Eton. It was.
He was at Harrow.
He was at Wellington. He ran away from Wellington.
And he was writing already himself and reading around socialism and communism and the Bolshevik Revolution and all of that. And he produced this sort of student type schoolboys newspaper, and somehow it found its way to the Redesdale.
That's right.
Empire and so on. And she would read these things and subscribe to it, and it would come. And she learned a lot of politics from it. And she, at a distance, thought, I'm in love with Esmond Romilly. This is the man for me. When she was 16 and 17.
2 years before she met him, she had fallen in love with him. You've said so many things I want to come back to, and one of the things I want to touch on that you just said about meeting her and her interest in you is that she was so interested. The thing that makes Jessica Mitford really unusual in this family, and really unusual, I think, in her class, as I've come to understand it, is how profoundly interested she was in the outside world and in other people. And, the aristocracy, let's face it, it is not raised to be interested in other people, right? Doesn't need to be. That is not a feature of the upper classes in any country.
Interesting that you said that. It's true.
But she, was deeply interested in other people, and so here she was, deeply interested in a bigger world than she could have in Astle or Swinbrook or the Cotswolds, and no way to get there. So at 11 years old, she starts a running away account at the bank. And at Drummond's Bank, and her, it actually was called running away account, RAA, her running away account. And she put every spare, shilling, anything she could get into this account. She was determined to get away from a world that so many other people thought was rather perfect. She called her family manor life that dread place. And she really wanted to get away, but she, of course, had no way of getting away. So she fantasized getting away, and she fell in love before she ever met him with Esmond Romilly, Winston Churchill's nephew, and her second cousin, who was an extremely famous runaway. How many of you know the story of Esmond? A few of you. Well, let me do it as Benji as quickly as I can.
Story.
So Esmond Romilly was a famous rebel and runaway from Wellington who published his first book, if you can believe this, again, you can't make this stuff up, before he turned 16. He wrote a book about the British school system with his brother Giles called Out of Bounds. And it's a wonderful manifesto of what a free education should look like. And he published that before he was 16, was already famous as a rebel, had run away from school, was living on the bookstore floor. This would sort of be where he would sleep at night, was living on the streets. And Esmond, who was an incredibly charismatic and charming and
That's
really
right.
brilliant, quite handsome young man, went away, as progressives did, to fight in the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
And he joined up with the Spanish Civil War so early that there wasn't yet an English brigade. Esmond joined up with something called the Thalmann Brigade, which was German and Italian, because he was one of the first Brits to get to Spain to fight for the cause of democracy against the fascists. And he was an incredibly brave fighter. He was a very careless, notoriously careless young man, but an incredibly brave fighter. Like many of the young men of his class, he didn't believe harm could come to him. He believed in the sort of golden aura that seemed to surround him, that he would live forever and be untouchable. And he was an incredibly brave soldier. In his brigade, only 2 men survived. 2. And he was one of them, and he barely made it out alive. He was hit with just horrific dysentery. He was invalided back to England. And then after he recovered from dysentery, it was his job to go around the countryside
Recruiting.
and tell, no, it was even worse than recruiting. It was his job to tell all the families of the fallen how their loved ones had died. What a grim job, can you imagine? So then he had to recover from that. So he went to the country home of his cousin Dorothy, where finally he met his cousin Jessica Mitford at dinner. They were seated next to each other. She leaned into him and said, "Are you going back to Spain?" He said, "I am." She said, "Will you take me?" He said, "I will." And really the next thing was, "I do." You know, they fell in love immediately. They went away to Spain. They actually made their way very briefly to the front, where Decca shot at a tree. She had a fighting outfit, brown corduroy fighting outfit. She was going to wear that. She shot at a tree. And they had to leave because the family had the means and the connections to not only send Sister Nancy and her husband Peter Rod to fetch them back to England, but they sent them in a destroyer.
Yeah, I mean, it really became a war effort, you know.
Yeah,
it really
huge.
was.
And
the minute, you know, we then I think had a Ministry of War. Anyway,
That's right.
they sent basically the gunboats to get them
they
back.
and they threatened them. They said, "We will take 300 refugees out of here, but only if you leave." And of course, that what could they do? Their hands were tied, so they left. But they jumped ship in France. They didn't go all the way back to England. And she had a wild life for 4 years with Esmond Romilly. They went back to England briefly. They actually tried running a gambling. There's so many ridiculous stories. They tried running a gambling den. I've never seen Boulez played, but Esmond was a big fan. Has anyone played Boulez? Or I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Boule? Is it Boule? Anyway, he was going to run a gambling den. They lived in a commune over by the river.
Bermondsey, they actually
In Rotherhithe. In Rotherhithe, in a tiny, strange, skinny house, which is the only thing left standing on the bank. It's actually still there. And then they were going to make their way to the United States, because they were going to make their fame and fortune as lecturers on the British aristocracy. And they thought there was a ready audience for this. Esmond was filled with schemes, always. He was a genius at schemes. And they came to the United States, and they didn't do the lectures.
But they lost the baby.
But they lost a baby, first in England.
Because she was, when she got back from their travels, she was pregnant, and that baby
That's right.
died.
Of measles.
Yeah.
The assumption of the public health nurses, where they were living in Rotherhithe, was that she'd been exposed. But of course, as a child of the aristocracy, she hadn't been exposed.
No vaccine, yeah.
And there weren't vaccines, but there was exposure, so she had no inoculation. And the baby and she both got measles, and Julia died before she was 6 months old.
Yeah.
And it's
And
one
really
of the
was,
many
that
tragedies.
was one of the compulsions for them to want to get away. I mean, as far away from as possible. And then they had the plots to go and make money in America.
All these plots, and they even owned a bar in Miami, and they had a series of escapades, and it was a pretty high time, a pretty madcap time, as the Washington Post put it. The Washington Post used to love to write about them, until the war was declared, and Esmond immediately joined up with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was trained as a navigator, which is a highly detailed job given to an incredibly undetailed young man. I'm not saying it was his fault, but his plane was very quickly shot down. He was killed. He was shot down over the North Sea. And Jessica Mitford, Decca, was alone. She was 19. By then they had their young daughter, Dinky, Benji's sister, known as Constancia Dinky Romilly.
This is something I discovered about the upper classes. Was that they're all called
nicknames.
Binky and
Dinky
and Donkey and
That's right. Yes.
Right.
And Decca. I mean, she kept her childhood nickname all her life. That's a real sign. She was a comrade with the nickname her sisters had given her. That should tell you a great deal of her divided sensibilities. And here she was alone in the United States. She's 19. She's got an infant daughter. She has no education, no training. She's cut off from her family. She blames them, not wrongly, for Esmond's death. She calls them the filthy fascists. She doesn't have money. Even if she wanted it, you couldn't get money across. It's a war. There's a war on. She is staying in the home of two civil rights icons from the South, Virginia and Clifford Durr. And they end up keeping her for 2 years while she finds her footing and becomes who she is for the rest of her life. Yeah. She gets a job in the Office of Price Administration, a wartime agency where she's an investigator, and she learns that she's really smart and really skilled and that she's a terrific investigator, and she rebuilds her life. She falls in love about a year after Esmond's death with a man named Robert Truhaft, an hysterically funny, wonderfully charming Hungarian descent Jewish attorney who she meets in the OPA and runs away from because she's not ready. So she goes to San Francisco and he follows her out there. And they do.
I want to tell the story about how they. No, I'll tell the story about how they met because they were.
Oh,
working.
please! It's my favorite.
It's one of my favorite things.
I love it.
Because it was Bob told me it because.
Should I hold the tray while you do it?
She was the New Deal was meaning that Roosevelt was trying all these things to try and make for after the Depression. And so they were working for this government entity that was for social justice, and so he said that she was very, very beautiful, and he'd be sitting at his formica table having his lunch, and he would watch this beauty, this absolutely English rose, and she would come with her tray and she'd put it on the thing, and then she would take down. She'd have a glass of juice of some sort, and she would drink it. And then she would take a plate of something else and she would eat it. And she would work her way along the cafeterias, the display of things, and she would basically eat her whole lunch and enough food for the whole day. And then she'd get to the end and she'd say, could I have a cup of coffee? And that would be...
And she'd pay the 5 cents for the cup of coffee.
And he then started watching this every day. He started watching just how scientific it was and how she had it worked out, and nobody noticed a thing, and then she'd arrive and all she had was a cup of coffee. And so one day he goes and he stands behind her and he walks with her and he watches her doing the whole thing, and then he said to her, "Are you not going to pay for all the other things that you got?" And that was the start of it. And he said, "I'll pay for your coffee." And he paid for her coffee.
That's right.
And they sat down, and then he said, "Tell me about yourself." And then of course she had that wonderful English way, and he fell in love head over heels.
He said that as soon as he saw the way she ate everything and then paid 5 cents for coffee, he said, "That's the girl for me." But he didn't think he had a chance. There's an incredible wealth of surviving correspondence, which was my source material for the book, because as Helena has already mentioned, Decca was very reticent about talking about her inner feelings or talking about how she felt about things. She really had a concrete upper lip, not a stiff upper lip, but a concrete one, as Virginia Durr said. And thank goodness there were this wealth of letters, including letters in which Bob, after falling madly in love with Decca, kept writing to his mother, Aranka, saying, "Well, I really don't have a chance. She's absolutely too remarkable for me." But fortunately, she made the decision that they were going to get married, and he did follow her out to San Francisco, and they went out for a drink, and she said, "What's the plan? Are we getting married?" And, that was the plan, and they did get married, and they started a life in Oakland, California, which turned out to be exactly the life that Jessica Mitford needed. And I think in many ways, Bob was exactly the second husband
Totally.
she needed. Esmond was the first husband she needed. He was her entree into the world of rebellion and resistance, not just through running away, but through the Spanish Civil War, which leaves an imprint on the rest of her life that I think is every bit as important as the imprint of her sisters. Because, of course, in the Spanish Civil War, what Jessica Mitford sees, what all the progressives throughout the globe sees, is people coming from all around the world willing to lay their lives on the line for the principle of fighting for democracy and against fascism. And that never leaves her. That understanding of what it means to really ally yourself with a cause and to put your body on the line for it. And with Bob, she joins the Communist Party.
She learned. I mean, she would say that Bob took her into a sort of deeper understanding of how social class and so on really affected the lives of people, and that took her on that journey into the Communist Party. I mean, to really join and so on. She also the thing that I think is really important is that her father was really a fascist as well. The whole flavour of the household was fascistic. I mean, it really was. And although Tom did go off and fought, I think
he did.
But there was a sort of sense in which they were very forgiving of Hitler and understood perfectly well why he was the way he was and all that.
And I may have glossed over Unity's role in all of this. Yeah. Did I glossed over that?
I think
didn't
you've
I?
got to tell it quickly.
I'll try to do it very quickly.
We've got Diana getting together with, of course, the fascist leader,
head of the British Fascist Party, right?
Ended up in jail because of it.
Unity, who said, "I'm going to be a Nazi," like all the girls, realized her dream. She went to Germany, stalked Hitler when he admitted that he had taken notice of her, which was instant because she was a stunning 6 foot tall Aryan goddess with aqua eyes, which all the Mitfords had. They became intimates. And there's a lot of debate over how we should understand that intimacy. So I'm just going to use the word intimate. And when the war was declared, Unity went into a park in Germany and took a tiny pistol out of her large handbag, put it up to her temple, pulled the trigger, and the bullet went through her brain and lodged at the back of her brain, at the back of her skull. And she lived about 8 more years with more or less the mental capacity of about an 8-year-old. So Jessica Mitford had a very keen sense of the kinds of costs of people's political opinion. She had a keen sense of the horrors of fascism and Nazism, from having to contend with the fact that her once beloved sisters had gone over to the darkest of the dark sides. And then she had another sense from having witnessed the sacrifice people made in Spain and the sacrifice of her own husband, Esmond Romilly, the sacrifice he made in the Second World War to fight the fascists. So when she and Bob joined the Communist Party, this was not frivolous. This was someone who was deeply committed to making a difference. And the Communist Party in California was the only version of the American Communist Party Decca could have possibly survived in, because it was looser than the party in the rest of the country. It was a little less rule-bound, it was a little less tied to central command, and Decca needed to make a difference. She needed to contribute to the cause, but she could only do that if she could also play. She had to be able to tell jokes and pranks and teases.
And she also, I mean, when they were in the Communist Party, she would tell stories about how they would be doing a fundraiser. And so she would then put her mind to it, and she'd say, "Oh, fine. Well, they can all come to our flat," and it would be a small apartment they were in. And she would say, "Put a sign on the door, Bob. If you're going to the toilet, you have to, or the lavatory," as she would have said. She would have corrected us, you know. If you're going to the lavatory, you have to pay 5 cents. If you're going to have a drink, whether it's water or whatever it is, there was a price on each thing. Everything you had to pay for.
Including leaving.
Leaving cost
you had to
money.
pay for it.
Coming in cost you money.
That's right.
Everything cost you money. And she rigorously went round and did all of that. But it was so fun, and they all laughed and would get drunk.
And she was very canny about knowing that if you're going to organize people to take risks and to fight for change, you have to also let them have a fun time while they're doing it. This is something that for Americans, and I have a number of American friends in the room, is an incredibly important reminder. Because right now, living in the United States, all we want to do is pull the covers over our heads. And, we go around in this state of just grimness and misery all the time. And Decca would have said, no, if you're going to get up every day to fight, you have to also get up every day ready to have a laugh, ready to have a joke. And she brought that sense of fierce, committed political partisanship and that sense of play into her Communist Party work, whether it was fundraising or the writing she was doing. She was an incredible researcher for the party. Her main work was through its Civil Rights Congress, the CRC of the American Communist Party, which was doing the most serious anti-racist work in the country. And Decca said, if I'm going to learn about American race, I want to learn it from black people. I don't want to learn it from white people. I want to learn from black leaders. And the Communist Party had women leaders and it had black leadership. And Decca essentially apprenticed herself to its black leadership, learned to do amazing organizing in Oakland and Richmond, California, with a bunch of people who were being beaten by the Oakland police, who were being denied housing, who were being denied jobs, a whole generation of black people whose rights she was fighting for, and whose children later became quite famous in the United States and come back into Decca and Bob's life because she was working with the parents of the people who later became known to you as the Black Panthers. So she was working in a black community that had a tradition of militancy, of resistance, of fighting back. And she went into these communities not pretending to be like the people she was fighting for, but perfectly willing to be a little bit silly, to be her completely British self. Her accent, which was very, very upper crust, got stronger every single year of her Oakland life. She knew just what she was doing. She stood out. She was very different from the people for whom she was organizing. She didn't look like a black person from Richmond, California, and she played into that.
And I think she was to tell a story about how she was in the car. She became very friendly with Maya Angelou,
yes,
who then, of course, became really famous as a writer and so on. And but she used to tell a story about how she and Maya were in a car together, and the police stopped them. And the police officer says, "What are you two doing in this car together? You know, we're suspicious, a black woman and a white woman. What are they doing together?" And she said, "I'm her mother."
That's right.
What are you? And she says, of course, in her very posh voice, "I'm her mother. Why are you stopping this car?"
That's right.
And Maya's driving like a lunatic.
And later, Decca decided she didn't like being Maya's mother. She was going to be Maya's sister. So she didn't like the age difference. So they referred to each other as sister, and people would say, "Well, you don't look anything alike." Decca was about 5'6". She was very light. She had bright blue eyes. Maya Angelou, of course, 6 feet tall, and commanded the room, commanded any room she came near. People would say, "You don't." They said, "Oh no, we are sisters." And I think there was a point to Decca playing into her visible difference from those she was fighting for, which is really worth taking to heart in today's political culture, which is we don't have to look like the people we're fighting for to care about what happens to them. We don't have to share their identities. We don't have to share their backgrounds or their stories, that we can fight for people's rights and people's dignity and people's lives who don't look anything like us. And that was very much the message of her politics throughout her time in the Communist Party. And she carried that right into her writing. She carried that sense that we don't have to be like other people to care about them. And she cared as a muckraker, she cared about a range of people, mostly rising to the defense of widows. Something about Decca that has not been well understood is that she lived as a feminist, although she never liked the title feminism.
I took her in Wellfleet when she came on holiday, and on one occasion, and Marge Piercy, it was and Marge was doing an event in the Congo, which was a congregational church where all the cultural events and writers would come and speak, and it's a wonderful place to go to. And so I said to her, "Marge Piercy's speaking at the thing, and I wanted to hear her." And she went, no, she came with me. Oh my God, it was so terrible because she sort of groaned every utterance. Benji's laughing.
Yes,
she would go, "Oh no!" It was really.
Yes.
It was quite embarrassing actually that she was definitely not into any of that what she saw as being sort of mad separatist stuff. But anyway, because she did like meal company and entertaining the guys. But we'd have to remember that she had in the midst of all of this, she had the terrible tragedy of losing Nicholas.
Horrible tragedy.
And it was a child who ran into the road and got knocked down and was killed.
Was that not down by a careless bus driver?
Careless bus driver.
He was delivering newspapers. Is that right?
Yeah.
And as I understand it, and Benji's here to correct me, but as I understand it, I mean, you're not here so that you can correct me, but you're here. Yeah. Oh God, please no, Ben, not that. As I understand it, what she did in response was to take down every photograph of Nicholas and to never speak of him again.
I never had a conversation with her about she'd lost this child. I became a close friend to her. I never ever had a discussion with her about Nicholas, losing Nicholas.
She really believed that what we have to do is keep forging ahead and keep fighting. And she did not want to be self-indulgent. She did not want, aside from with the family, but with other people, she didn't want to talk a lot about her own feelings. She lived through incredible difficulties and tragedies, the loss of 2 children, some really traumatic things that happened to her daughter, a terrible trauma that happened to her on the streets of California. And she didn't want to talk about those things. In fact, there's a letter that I came upon in the thousands and thousands and thousands of letters, which fortunately survive. And I want to say something about the importance of those letters in a second. But there was a letter written by a dear friend of hers, who I won't name tonight, but written by a dear friend who had come to the end of her rope and was writing Decca to say, I just can't do it anymore. I'm done. Things had gotten too horrible for this woman, and she was considering taking her own life. And she was writing to Decca to say, I just don't think I can do it anymore. I feel like I'm done. And what should I do? And Decca's advice was, you should be collecting shoes for the Montgomery bus boycott. That was her response. That she didn't say that to be cruel. She said that because that's how she lived with herself. When she went through the worst times in her life, and she went through terrible times in her life, she came out of them by fighting for other people, thinking about other people, being interested in other people, getting up every day to do something other than wallow in her own misery. Now, and she actually had a term for it. She called introspection grubbing about. That was what she called it, grubbing about. I don't want to grub about. Now, I'm an American, and I'm an American feminist who was raised during the time of consciousness raising, where we taught each other that the personal is political. I was raised to grub about. I'm a natural grubber about her, and I'm trained as a grubber about her. So I'm a trained grubber about her. And for me, it was the hardest thing about getting to know Jessica Mitford, a member of my writing group is here, who knows. I struggled for years to try to get to know somebody who wouldn't talk about her own feelings. But there were the letters. There were the letters in which she did talk about her own feelings. And she got up every day and wrote letters. The first thing Jessica Mitford did was she put on her bathrobe, she put on her slippers, she took her mug, which she usually filled not with coffee, but with vodka. Sometimes she had one in, this is true, sometimes she had one in each hand. She went to her desk to write, but she couldn't write until she engaged in a dialogue. Before she could write, she had to write letters, because she was a completely dialogic person. And so she sat down, and before she wrote what she was going to work on for that day, whether it was the American prison system or death and dying or what was happening with conspiracy cases in 1968 and the anti-Vietnam movement, she first wrote anywhere from 1 to 8 letters to friends and loved ones to talk about what she was going to write and why it mattered. And that quality from the letters, that quality of needing to talk to other people, needing to be in dialogue, it's why her written voice is so distinctive. Jessica Mitford is one of the most distinctive written voices in all of English literature. Like Virginia Woolf, You can pick up any sentence of Jessica Mitford's, and you know almost instantly it's Decca's. You can recognize her voice, and what I think it is, it's that quality of speaking to you. She embeds dialogue right into her muckraking, into her journalism. It partly comes from the talking to her sisters. It partly comes from the childhood antics, but it comes from those days of letter writing and those days of, I'm not going to indulge my own feelings, I'll just tell this one person in this letter, maybe to Maya, maybe to Sally Belfridge, maybe to her daughter Constancia, maybe to Helena, but I've always a very select audience. She wasn't going to put it out in public. And that quality of dialogue, of conversation, of being spoken to, that's what made her an extraordinary muckraker. We've had other muckrakers, right? We've had Upton Sinclair telling us about the horrors of the meatpacking industry. Don't worry, I'm not going to do it.
But it's important for people to understand the concept of the muckraker is pretty much an American idea.
Oh, completely. I think it's our only homegrown genre. I actually think, I think it's the only genre of writing that is fully American.
Now, and muckraking, most people think is sharing of gossip, but it's not. Muckraking is exposing corruption, exposing abuses, exposing the underbelly, and that was the whole thing about muckraking. And so it was a different thing from often what is understood by Brits, and she really did her homework, as you say, as a researcher, to get to that underbelly and to expose it, and to rake through it and then put it out there, and that's where she did her grubbing around.
Yes, and part of her genius as a muckraker, I mean, first of all, she revives a genre that in 1963, when she begins muckraking, the genre of muckraking, it's moribund. Nobody's doing it. It's something that had been done decades earlier. She brings it back because she's going to write a book about the funeral industry. And she's going to write a book about the way the funeral industry fleeces ordinary people and takes working people's death benefits, their union death benefits.
And that came out of, Bob was a trade union lawyer, as well as involved with civil liberties and things. And Bob was coming home and saying to her, "You won't believe it. That ordinary working class people were, and because of the emotions they were feeling about losing their husband in some industrial injury, then the funeral would cost them a bomb, and that any money they were getting, by way of compensation, if there was any, which he would try and get, ended up paying for these ridiculous funeral costs."
Exactly.
And so she really went to town on exposing the whole business, right?
And what she brings to that, she brings sort of three qualities that make it completely unusual. One is an aristocrat's disdain for the American way of doing things. So she has that outsider's perspective.
Vulgarity.
She just can't stand it. She's not as vulgar. And she has the outsider's eye on it. She was an indefatigable researcher. And the thing people don't understand about Decca, as a writer and as an activist, she was a phenomenally hard worker. I'm sure Benji saw this. She always put in the 14-hour day. She worked incredibly hard. She was a very profound researcher. So she brought to this book on death and dying her amazing research on absolutely everything, from the history of funeral practices in cemeteries to the most detailed description of embalming you have ever seen in your life.
And revolting.
And fabulous, revolting and fabulous. And then what she brought to it was her light touch, her humor, her sense of talking to you, and let's tell some jokes and let's make fun of the funeral directors. And it took a genre that nobody was working in, and it completely brought it back to life. I mean, to the point that really everything Ralph Nader writes or says really should be dedicated to Decca, because she brings back the genre of muckraking and investigative journalism. And the book, American Way of Death, is co-written with Bob, start to finish. It only carries Jessica Mitford's name because that's how the publisher wanted it. They knew what would sell and what wouldn't. Completely co-written, was a blockbuster success that was on the bestseller lists of the New York Times for almost an entire year. It was almost 52 weeks during a period when James Baldwin is having his breakout success, when Betty Friedan is publishing The Feminine Mystique, and when Rachel Carson is publishing The Silent Spring. But it was Jessica Mitford who was the spectacular success because she knew how to research. She knew how to expose corruption. She knew how to defend widows who were being taken advantage of. She knew how to do it by making you laugh.
And she gave great interviews.
And she gave a great interview. And she was a gorgeous writer. And it was that book that established her success.
It catapulted her to
Completely. Gave her the platform. And then she had to figure out how to use it. And then she knew she was a celebrity. And the question was, how am I going to use it for the rest of my life? And she never again had the spectacular success of the American way of death. She made much more money. I do detail in the book what her contracts were. They doubled with every single book until the end, when it was about 10 times what other books had been. She made a fortune on the last book of her life. But she was very careful about her reputation. She knew that she had something unique to offer and that she had a platform because of the success of that book, and she wanted to use it for the right causes.
And she did it on prisons.
Yes.
I mean, and towards the end, she did The American Way of Birth.
Well, that was the one that made all the fortune.
Yeah, well,
she called it, a golden shower, the likes of which she had never seen, a rain of gold. She made an extraordinary amount of money off of that book.
Yeah.
But she wrote constantly. She wrote hundreds of essays. She wrote hundreds of letters to the editor. She was never not working on multiple pieces at once. And she wrote a series of very important books on the American prison industry, on the 1968 trial of Dr. Benjamin Spock, known as America's baby doctor. She was, we believe, I can't completely guarantee this, I believe she is the first person to ever use the term prison abolition in a serious and an ongoing way. She helped develop what we understand to be prison abolition today. She did incredibly important work and was very smart about having that platform. But what everybody wanted from her was, please be funny again. They all wanted her to be as funny as she had been in The American Way of Death. And she was writing about things like the prison industrial complex and its mistreatment of black militants.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't think that was very funny. And her son-in-law was one of them. She was very afraid her son-in-law, James Foreman, would end up in prison. So she was always using her reputation, but also fighting with it. People wanted her to be the sort of madcap Mitford, and she didn't always want to be the madcap Mitford. Sometimes she was willing to do it. She could make a great deal of money being madcap and funny. She wrote 6 articles on dieting, about which she could care less. I mean, it really didn't, but she made a fortune, doing send-ups of Weight Watchers and being funny on that. So she always had to balance her reputation for being hilariously funny with her commitment to writing that made a difference.
Yeah. Now listen, we've got to bring all of you in, and I'm mindful of the time. So how about us moving? I just wanted to say one final thing, which is that she really did get lucky in getting such a great biographer, really, because you really capture that thing, that contradiction, those pools that continued all her life. But the other thing is that don't you wish she were around now to deal with Trump?
Oh my God!
Can you think that she would have had an absolute ball mocking him, taking a rise out of him? She would have had a hell of a good time.
And we need her so badly today.
Yeah.
I sort of, I think we should have a series of T-shirts. What would Decca say, right? I'm serious. That I like, because she would so have her way with people like Donald Trump. She loved nothing more than skewering pomposity and skewering hypocrisy. That was her favorite thing. And of course, nothing he says is true. I mean, he cannot say a true word.
And his sheer vulgarity.
And his vulgarity. Oh my God. She would absolutely have her way with him, and we need that. Yeah. Because what she understood is that you have to take the fascists, and let's be clear, he's a complete fascist, right? You have to take the fascists deadly seriously, and you have to mock them. And this was something she really understood, that what happens when we mock the fascists is we come together as a community. We come together as a community that's laughing at them. And she would have brought us together over the horror of the moment we're living through. We need her so much.
We need her.
We need her.
Out there are people who did know her, and there are others who just want to know a bit more. So can I have some hands? Who would like to come on in? Sir.
Hello there, Latter-day Mitford here. I must connect with Benji over there as a long lost.
So whose grandchild are you?
So my mother was first cousin twice removed of Decca.
Oh.
So of the youngest, of David's brothers, the youngest brother had one son who had one son who was my uncle. So the title sort of.
Well, as I left the House of Lords, I saw Rupert.
Oh, you did.
Reedsdale.
Oh, you did. Wonderful.
Now,
that's my uncle. Rupert.
That's your uncle.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
so nice to meet you, and I hope you two have met.
We must connect. But I thought I'd share a quick story. My mother studied in America in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Oh.
And met my father there.
At Duke or at UNC?
At UNC.
Okay.
UNC. And so Decca was coming to talk one day, so she and my father thought, well, we must go and see her. So of course they sat there, and afterwards she timidly makes her way up to say hello, and she says, "Oh, hello there. I'm actually a Mitford as well." And it's important to know that at this point because there were six, she was one of six girls and one brother.
Yes.
They were known because it replicated strangely the
the
makeup
Mitfords.
of the original.
The
They were known as the second wave of Mitfords. Mitford
Okay.
girls. So Decca says to her, yes, the second wave of Mitford girls. But what have you done? So my mother said, I'm sorry, I don't know, and retreated.
And that was it? Was that it?
And that was it, yeah.
Really? They never...
She got her signature and sort of retreated.
Well, and I'm sorry, what's her first name?
Victoria was my
No,
name.
your first name.
Oh, Harley.
Harley,
Nice to meet
let me
you.
ask you a question. What have you done?
I'm filming this. For a start.
Oh dear, I didn't know. Oh, hello family, I was just joking. Please. Okay.
No.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you so much for your wonderful talk.
Oh, well, thank you.
enjoyed it.
Harley, that's
That's
lovely.
wonderful, Harley.
No, back there, please. A hands up, you, yes.
I didn't know Decca, but I did have some nice conversations with Debo.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't meet her, but on the telephone a few years ago. And I'm wondering how the relationship was with her sisters, perhaps particularly Debo, where although we haven't got the drastic political difference, obviously Debo was a duchess. So how did their relationship sort of go on?
They were good. They remained. I mean, they remained tight until the end. Didn't they?
In fact, that was the last phone call of Decca's life. So her very last phone call was with her sister, Debo. They remained in contact. For many, many years, Decca couldn't travel to the United States. She was denied, as a communist, she was denied a passport. And so she was never able to travel back to England. She couldn't leave the United States. But the first thing she did when she got her passport finally was she went back. And she went back every year from then on, sometimes twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. And from my perspective, which, let me be clear, is quite partisan, I'm not, a fan of the Mitford girls in the sort of, I don't dress up as them. I don't. No, look, there are people who do. Some of them may be in this room. So I'm just saying, there is an industry of this. I have never been one. I am very partisan to Decca. But in my view, she was incredibly generous to her sisters. And I don't think they met her in kind. I think they were quite sniping about her behind her back. And she didn't feel that was true of Debo. And only towards the end of her life found out even Debo had been quite nasty about her behind her back, would describe her as unfashionable, dowdy, criticized her hair, criticized her clothing. Decca was very uninterested in keeping up with fashion. She was very uninterested in the way Nancy never gained an ounce all her life. It was a moral issue for Nancy. I'm not kidding. Weight was a moral issue. Gaining weight was just an absolute horror. Decca didn't care about all of that. She had other things she worried about. And she was actually very generous in keeping up with her sisters. They wrote to each other all their lives, not Diana. She always said she never saw Diana again. That's actually not true. There's 2 weeks in which she does. But she, of course, lost unity. But she was very interested in staying connected to her sisters. What I believe, this is the biographer speaking now, is that one of the real heartbreaks of Decca's life, in my view, is that I don't think her sisters could ever quite see her. I don't think they could understand that she had made a choice that for her was happier and much more fulfilling than their lives. And I think they looked down at her. They sometimes treated her as sort of dowdy or, not able to do the things they could do. And there was tension. There was love and tenderness and connection, and they were fine. And there was also tension. I'm actually wearing a brooch of Decca's. This was given to me by her last assistant. And the reason I mention it is because one of the tensions was every time she'd come to England every year, she'd also go to Paris, where Nancy was living, and Nancy only shopped at Chanel. No, this is really true. And maybe one other designer. And Nancy would take Decca into Chanel, into the boutique, every time Decca visited, and it wasn't a kind thing to do. It was a sort of showing up, because Nancy, of course, was still a size 2. Decca was an American size 10. I think that's perfectly normal. But Nancy was sort of emphasizing their differences. And one day when Decca had in her pocket some of the Advance for the American Way of Death, she walked into the Chanel boutique with Nancy and bought this brooch. Just laid down cash and bought the brooch, and it's been given to me by Decca's assistant, to whom it was given at the end of her life. And for me, it signals the way in which she lived her own life. She made her own choices. She knew that she had the most fulfilling and happy life she could have had. But there was also always that tension with the sisters who valued things like this, and fashion, and brooches, and being elegant, and being thin, and being wealthy, in a way Decca did not. And I think she wanted them to see her. I think she wanted them to see her life, her marriage, her children, her happiness, the politics. I'm not sure they ever completely did. I think they tried. I don't know. Do you think they ever saw her fully?
I don't know, but certainly I remember that she did go to Chatsworth, and,
Yes.
and certainly Dinky keeps on, or kept up with Debo after her mother's death.
Yes.
But I could never fathom that what the nature of that relationship was. Anyone else out there got something urgent, and maybe Benji's got an answer to the closeness, whether Debo was killed.
Well, about the sisters. Well, there's this play that went on. Unfortunately, it's over now, so you can't see it. But there is the written play, which is brilliant, by a person called Amy Rosenthal. She's Jewish, so she wrote a play about the Mitfords called The Party Girls. And she focused on Bob, which is great for me, because Bob and Dec's romance is sort of runs through this play. And through the play, the actors, for example, Debo, and talking to Nancy, I think, and or Diana. Even Diana is made human in this thing. Anyway, they're always rolling their eyes about Deck and saying, "Well, she's given up. She says, well, luckily for Decca, she's away from the torture of living, this beautiful life we all used to live. They tortured her, and then when it came to so Decca is quite rich by this time in this play. Decca has a few bucks, and so they're saying, and Decca's always dropping names. Oh, I just talked to Maya the other day, and Liza Minnelli was there, and so the Decca dropping names, which is true. But I mean, they also were admiring her, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be talking about her.
So shameless plug, Amy Rosenthal and I and the biographer of Jessica Mitford and the girl's mother of Sydney Reedsdale, we will all be at the London Library tomorrow night at 7:00. So I don't know if that's sold out, but shameless plug, you can hear. I haven't been able to read the play, although I'm desperate.
For you.
Oh, please do. I'll stay up all night tonight and I'll read it for tomorrow.
Give you 10 minutes. It's very
Really? Okay. I need my copy.
Good.
Well, that's a great note on which to end. I've got to draw it to an end.
Yeah.
But what a fabulous conversation between two people who knew Decca so well and really saw her. So they will both be signing copies of their books. And let's join together to give them a huge...